should I be quiet?
Shalom, shalom. Unless you want to ask a question, you don't have to not ask questions. I've got to wait and see if anybody comes on. Hey, Eva. Yeah, well, I lost power, and that's why I'm not in my usual spot. So my internet has been down all day long. Our power has been down all day long, so I wasn't sure this was going to happen, but our friend and neighbor Mark was kind enough to invite me over here. So we're going to rock and roll here as soon as we get more people logged in. Can you hear me, Eva? Shalom, shalom. I got a few people logging in. Excellent. I have to do the old man look. It's because I wear bifocals. I'm not trying to be arrogant. Shalom, Deborah. Shalom, Gila. We'll wait a few more minutes. I was unable to post a notice. Can't use Zoom tonight because I'm not at my computer, and the login and the application and everything for Zoom is on my computer, so I'm on my telephone. Shalom, Yosef. Yes, I'm an old man. Who can remind me where we left off last week? I didn't have a chance to review. I think I know, but I didn't have a chance to review. So if anybody remembers exactly where we left off, that would be helpful. Otherwise, I'm just going to plunge in once we get started. Bueller. Mishahu Zocher. Anybody remember? Yom Kippur, huh? I know we were talking about Yom Kippur, but where do we leave off? Again, I think I know, but it's always good to review. Shalom, shalom. Sorry about not being able to do a Zoom tonight. I don't know how this live is working and when you join what you're hearing, if you're starting at the beginning or if you're starting with us live. But our power has been out all day long and our data has been down all day long. And so I was unable to do a whole lot of preparation other than reading, reviewing the scriptures and other documents, but I was unable to do my brief review of what we did last week. So, looks like we've settled in on a number, so I'm going to get started. Baruch atah Yehovah Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Yehovah noten haTorah b'shem Yeshua HaMashiach. Amen. So yes, we have been talking about Yom Kippurim. And as I remember, we did mention the 7 days leading up to it, which are in the Mishnah, which is in the Kohen Gadol going into a private chamber with his wife, with another bride waiting outside, and spending those 7 days to prepare for Yom Kippur, which is the highest day of the year. And so what we're going to do tonight, and you'll just have to interject your questions. I'll try my best to watch for your questions or comments on the feed, but I can't guarantee that I'll see them. For one thing, I'm having to do the old man look. Maybe Betsy can help me. She's in the room. Maybe she can help me read what questions come across. So I'm going to start in our Siddur, which in the revised version is on page 180. And it says, Ach Basol HaChodesh, which is the first prayer that we do in a congregational setting on Yom HaKippurim, Yom Kippur. And that is a scripture that is among some that the Kohen Gadol reads in the temple at Yom Kippur, while the offerings, the first offerings of Yom Kippur are burning on the altar. And so it's happening at the same time, and we know that because the Mishnah says that if you're standing and looking at the altar while it's burning, you can't see the Kohen, and vice versa. If you're looking at the Kohen while he's reading, you can't see the altar. And so you just have to study the configuration of the temple in order to see that. But it's basically saying that both of them were happening at the same time. So while that altar is burning, these prayers are being read. And so we read Vayikra 23, verses 27 and 28. But on the 10th day of this Chodesh, which is the mitzvah, telling us, Shalom Daniel, telling us actually to observe Yom HaKippurim. So Yom Kippur is mentioned in Vayikra 16, Vayikra 23, and there is a place in Numbers, I just forget what it is, but perhaps we'll run across it. So these prayers, many of the prayers that we're going to read were actually recited by the Kohen Gadol himself, the high priest himself. So on the 10th day of this 7th Chodesh is Yom HaKippurim. There shall be a Mikra Kodesh unto you, and you shall afflict your souls, and you shall bring a carbon of fire unto Yahweh. And of course, we talked about that last week, and we associated it with the two wives, this one being the second wife, and the other one on Yom Teruah being the first wife, that the carbon of fire, Hikravtim Isha la Yahweh, you shall bring near a wife to Yahweh, is it one literal way that you could read that sentence, even though it is, you shall bring a carbon of fire to Yahweh. You shall do no manner of work in that same day, for it is Yom Kippurim, to make atonement for you before Yahweh your Elohim. So we are doing this in the synagogue as both a commemoration of what used to happen and theoretically as a commemoration of what Yeshua did for us already, and then also a foreshadowing and a rehearsal. And again, Colossians is the one, I think it's 2:14, that says that the Moedim, the feasts, the seasons are shadows of things to come. And so we believe that that's why we should have been, for these last 2,000 years, continuing to do these things, or I should say 1,700 years, because it wasn't until the mid-4th century that we were forbidden to do them anymore. And many of the congregations, if not most of the congregations of Messiah up until that point, did observe them in some form or fashion. So, because they were all led by Jewish people and taught by Jews. But so we're commemorating and rehearsing. Our commemoration is what Elohim has done in the past for us, the fact that he provided atonement for Israel up until the point of Yeshua. And then one thing that we need to think about is that Yeshua died on Passover, rose again from the dead on the first Omer, which is the beginning of the season of Bikurim, which goes all the way to Shavuot. And so, and we are told in the Brit Hadashah in several places, and perhaps we'll read them tonight, we are told that he made atonement for us. And that's in the past tense, that Yeshua made atonement for us. And of course, if you study Passover, and really all the Moedim, especially the Chag Moed, the feast, the ones where all of Israel is supposed to be there, the 3 Chags that where all of Israel is supposed to be there, which are Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, you see that there were atonements, offerings of atonement on each of those days, but none of them were to the level of what Yom Kippur was about. And but nonetheless, they were there. And so we mentioned it last week. I believe Joe brought it up. I don't know if he's on. I haven't seen him yet. But that there is a spiral of time, and there seems to be some overlap between the Moedim. And so Yeshua, that overlap actually begins at the very beginning, the seed of his ministry, which was when he was planted in the womb of Miriam. And so he was her conception happened at Hanukkah, and he was born at Sukkot. But that's the only part of Sukkot that he fulfilled, and it really wasn't a fulfilling. It was kind of just a taste, a foreshadowing perhaps, but that was to make him to be circumcised on the 8th day, the day of rejoicing in the Torah, and of course he is the Torah. And so 8 days after his birth, he was circumcised and brought into the covenant of Abraham, and they were rejoicing in the Torah on that day. All of Israel was rejoicing in the Torah on the day Yeshua was circumcised, and I fully believe that. But that isn't a fulfillment of everything that Sukkot is about, even though it does have, there are many, many reasons why I believe it was Sukkot, but we'll get to that when we talk about Sukkot. But what I'm bringing up is that his birth sort of started on the other side of the spiral, if you will. And then, of course, he goes through that spiral 33 times in his life. And he starts his ministry in the 30th rotation through that spiral of time. And he begins the redemption, his ministry of redemption of all peoples begins at Passover. And so and many of you know this, and I don't know that we've brought it up in our study so far, but Yeshua, on the day that he rose from the dead, he rose from the dead late at night, very late at night, after the Sabbath had left, while it was still dark. And you read all 4 Gospels, especially Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They all say that in different ways, and one of them, and I want to say that it's Luke, is very specific. When the Sabbath was leaving before dawn, or very early, very late in the darkness. So there's different phraseologies. Maybe we should look at it if you want to. I suppose we can. But so he rose from the dead at night, but he sees Miriam while it was still dark. So that he met the women at the tomb very early in the morning before dawn, and he had already been out of the grave for 6 hours probably, because dawn in Israel in the spring is roughly 6 to 6:30 in the morning. And so he'd already been out of the grave for a while, and he hung around in the garden, waited for them to show up, appears to Miriam, and in that episode, she runs up and tries to touch him, and he says, "Do not touch me, I have not yet ascended." And so that is alluding to Yom Kippur. So here we have Yeshua on the dawning of the day of the first Omer, the first of the first fruits. He's standing there. Miriam wants to hug him. He's risen from the dead. He's in a resurrected, glorified body. He's risen from the dead. And she wants to touch him, and he says, "Do not touch me, I have not yet ascended to my Father." And that's very similar. It's invoking Yom Kippur language, where the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, has to dress in all of his garments, but before he does that, he has to immerse 5 times. And the Mishnah is very specific about this. He immerses 5 times, puts on his robe, washes his hands and feet again, and then takes up the cup, and before he goes in, he has to say something like that. "Don't touch me, I have to ascend, I have not yet ascended." And so Yeshua is invoking imagery of Yom Kippur during the season of Passover, on the first fruits, and he's telling her, "Don't touch me, I haven't ascended yet." And then he goes and has lunch, because if you put all of the narratives together, then you find out that in the afternoon at Arochat Zohoraim, the noon meal, he's walking with 2 or 3 men, I can't remember all of a sudden, on the road to Emmaus. It's 2 men walking on the road to Emmaus, and they don't recognize him. They've hung out with him. Their hearts are sorrowful because they know that Yeshua is dead. They didn't know that he was alive. They had heard that some women who were crazy said he was alive, and they didn't believe him. And he's telling them all that the scriptures say, all that Torah says, and all that the Psalms say, and the prophets, and how they wrote of Yeshua. And that walk, so he spent about 2 hours teaching them from the scriptures, and the only scriptures that existed at the time were Genesis to 2nd Chronicles, and that's in the order, the Jewish order. It's the same books that Protestant community has, but that's the order that they're in, about himself. And then he sits down to the noon meal, breaks bread, and vanishes from their sight, and they recognized him as soon as he broke bread. And so it doesn't say anything about them touching him at that point, however. So we don't know. But that evening, which was Sunday evening, they were assembled in the room. And when I say they, I'm talking about 10 men, because Thomas was not there. Judas has died. Thomas was not there. So 10 men and some others were locked in this room for fear of the Jews for their lives, because they had just killed Yeshua. Kepha and Yochanan, Peter and John, had gone and seen the empty tomb, but they hadn't seen Yeshua. Miriam has said that she's seen him, but they're still in disbelief. They're still bewildered. Yeshua appears in the room, and then he says, "Touch me and see that I am flesh and bone, just like you are." And so there's a lot that is established there. First of all, that it was a bodily resurrection, that Yeshua was in a human body. "I am flesh and bone, just like you are." And so he had shed all his blood. It's the Ruach, the very breath of God, that's invigorating his mortal body such that it's no longer mortal, but it's still the same frame that he died in. And they are able to recognize him. And then a week later, 8 days later, on a Monday night, Thomas shows up and touches the scars that are in his body. So God left those scars in his body. And we have to presume that they're going to be there for eternity, to be reminders of us that he died for us. But my point is that they touched him, versus Miriam not being permitted to touch him in the morning. So something happened. Yeshua said, "I have not yet ascended." So presumably one has to conclude that by the evening time, he must have ascended. And so where did he ascend to? To his Father. And so it says that he made atonement for us in the inner sanctuary in the book of Hebrews. And so Yeshua had to go up there and make atonement and come back in order to further minister to his Talmidim over the course of the next 40 days. So the point being is that the days that Elohim has given us are symbolic of things that are happening in his sanctuary, and he told us that. He tells us in the book of Hebrews that he told Moshe, and it's an echo of what's written in the Torah over in the book of Shemot, Exodus, make the tabernacle as you have seen the image in the mountain. In other words, I showed you the image of the tabernacle. I showed you the pattern for it while you were on the mountain. While Moshe was on the mountain, he saw the temple of God. He saw the actual temple. And of course, Hebrews further tells us that Yeshua ministered in a temple not made by the hands of men. And so my point is, Yeshua went up there and performed the rites of Yom Kippur, partially at least, and then came back down. And you see a couple of those ascents and descents in the Yom Kippur behavior of the Kohen Gadol when you start studying what they actually did in the temple. And so there were multiple times that the Kohen had to redress. When he was going to perform the sacrifices, he could dress, he could choose which linens he wanted to wear. They had to be very fine linen. Some of them were from India, and they cost like 24 dinars, which is gold dinars. This is not cheap. It's very expensive linen that he could choose to dress in, or he could choose to dress in the lesser, his daily linens, if you will. But it all had to be white. And so that brings me to our customs. Many of you know, I don't know who's watching, I can't see everybody tonight, but many of you know that when we assemble for Yom Kippur, we dress in all white. And the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, did that. If you remember, every other day of the year when the Kohen is ministering in the temple, he dressed in techelet, which is sky blue. His robe was sky blue, and then he had a very colorful ephod on that was made of fine twine threads, and over that the breastplate and the Urim Vetumim, which we'll mention here again in a minute, the breastplate that had the stones in it, and then the stones up on his shoulders, and then that turban on his head with a gold crown on it that said Kadosh LaYahweh on it. And so his daily, every other day that he ministered, he was dressed very finely, but on Yom Kippur, the day of affliction, he's toned it down, if you will. It's still fine linen, but it's very fine, which is symbolic. And that's what you're seeing in the book of Revelation. Everybody is dressed in white in the book of Revelation. So a lot of what's going on in heaven in the book of Revelation is Yom Kippur stuff. Okay? So Yeshua goes up there and does at least part of the ministry of atonement. And because he comes back and then he allows them to touch him. Let me think a minute and see. It's kind of hard without interaction to gauge whether I need to go on. So I'm going to pause. If anybody has any questions, let me know. Y'all there?
No questions yet.
No questions?
But you're about, I'd say, I'm saying about a minute ahead from
Yeah.
what you said to this.
Okay.
See a thumbs up.
Yeah. Okay. So,
Another.
So Yeshua made an atonement for us. And so that's a bit of an overlap. That's what I'm talking about in regard to the timeline of the Bible being a spiral, because these feasts are exactly 6 months apart. And so you're seeing some overlap here. You saw Yeshua born on Sukkot. Now he's begun the ministry of redemption on Passover, and it's going to be complete on Yom Kippur 2,000 years later. So, hey, Albert. So, it's going to be complete on Yom Kippur 2,000 years later, hopefully about 7 years in our future. But all of these feasts have to take their place in this. And so we talked about Yom Teruah already, so hopefully that didn't interfere. Are you guys still there? I just got a call. I'm sorry, that phone call just derailed me. Hang on. So we're going to have, let me just get back to this. Okay, so the Kohen Gadol is going to come out on Yom Kippur. He's going to dress in his linens. He's going to immerse 5 times. He's going to perform the rite of the sacrifices, and there's multiple sacrifices that happen on Yom Kippur. And I think we already read that. I'm not 100% sure. My memory is plaguing me right now. I didn't get a chance to review, but I think we already read that. There's a lot of sacrifices that have to happen. I don't think it's necessary that we go through all of those for our purpose of this study. But what I do want to talk about is the fact that in some of the sacrifices, the smaller sacrifices, which would be the goat, and there's a couple of burnt offerings and lambs and stuff like that, and you can read about that in Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 16, and again in chapter 23 a little bit, but there's more detail in chapter 16, I believe. And so for those from the Mishnah, which is the only document that gives us eyewitnesses accounts of what happened, actually second generation accounts of what happened in the temple, is for those smaller sacrifices, this is very interesting, for those smaller sacrifices, at least 9 and no more than 12 men, 12 priests, would help with those sacrifices. And when there were 9, there would also be a 10th person holding water on certain days, especially on Sukkot, because there was a lot of libations on Sukkot. And so, but you at least had to have 9 and no more than 12. That's a very interesting number to me. Okay? So, and then for the bull offering, which is obviously a huge animal, there was always at least 12 men. And so, and it had to be a different group of guys. And so this invokes some imagery to me. When Yeshua got to heaven 2,000 years ago and made atonement for the believers who would be his during the Messianic age from 2,000 years ago to now, 12 of the men who would be seated around the thrones were already there, and the other 12 were still on earth. And so the 12 that I'm talking about, the book of Revelation bears this out, that there were 24 thrones around the throne of God, and it explains that 12 of them were the sons of Israel. That would be Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, all of those guys. But that's one of the 12. And then the other 12 are the shlichim, the apostles. Well, at this point, the apostles are still on earth. And so what you're seeing here, I believe, is the 2 different phases of the Yom Kippur sacrifice, which is taking place in heaven, which is Yeshua's blood, Yeshua making atonement for us. And you see that atonement, that second atonement, happening in the book of Revelation for the rest of the nations, if you will, for the rest of the people who are coming to faith during that time, whereas our atonement took place already. Does that make sense, Betsy?
Yes.
Okay, so I think that there is a reason for that. I don't think that God did anything by accident, and that our Jewish people, I've said this before, they cannot help but point to Yeshua. So Yeshua has already made atonement for us, and so we're commemorating that by doing Yom Kippur, by doing what they did in the temple, because what they did in the temple on earth was symbolic. They were taught it by Moshe, and it was symbolic of what was going on up in heaven. And then what you see in the Hitgalut, you're going to see these atonements happening, even though sometimes when you first read it, you don't understand what you're looking at. So it helps to understand Yom Kippur a little bit better. Why no Zoom? Because my power is out at home, and my internet was down. I couldn't even get data on my phone. The Zoom account is on my computer, and I can't get to it. So that's why we're on Facebook Live. Sorry, Joe. So the next prayer, Vehitvadu את עוונם ואת עוון אבותם במעלם אשר מעלו בי ואף אשר הלכו עמי בקרי. Okay, so what this is this is the Cohen confessing the iniquity of Israel. And so the Cohen on Yom Kippur would get up and he had to say a certain confession, all of my transgressions, iniquities, and sins, and there's different Hebrew words in the rabbinic community. Early on, there was debate about how that would be said. That's not important, just that all of it had to be confessed. And so the Cohen would confess his own sins and make the offering over himself, which would require those 9 to 12 guys. And then he would make an offering over Israel, which would require those 9 to 12 guys. And then he would make another offering, which would be the bull, which would require 12 other guys. So he's doing these recitations at a certain point. Some of them he would read, and then the one out of Numbers he had to actually memorize and quote. So I am on page 181 of the New Siddur. Even I am he. This is Yeshayahu 43, Isaiah chapter 43. Am he that blots out your transgressions for my own sake, and your sins I will not remember. Put me in remembrance, lest let us plead together. Declare that you may be justified. Ki im dam haparim v'hasirim ve'efer hapara asher yutze al hatmeim yekadshem letaher besaram. So what we are doing is we are inserting the book of Hebrews. And if the blood of goats and calves and the ashes of a heifer sprinkled on those who were defiled consecrated them even to the cleansing of their flesh, how much more will the blood of Mashiach, who through the eternal Ruach offered himself without blemish to Elohim, purify our conscience from dead works so that we may serve the living Elohim. So we are inserting in the liturgy, in Messianic circles, we are inserting in the liturgy the fact that Yeshua is our once and final offering. And in Yochanan Aleph 1:9, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all our iniquity. So that is what we as Messianics are doing, is we are commemorating what Yeshua has done for us already. But we're also forward-looking, and hopefully you're going to continue to see that. There is a prayer in Judaism on page 183 of our New Siddur that is called Vidui al-Chait, and that's the confession of sins. And it's the whole congregation together confessing our sins. And so we're doing that in a small part as believers, together but separate, in doing teshuvah right now. We're doing it as individuals in order to get our hearts right, such that we can approach others that we may have offended on this earth. And it actually says in the Mishnah that one of the rabbis of the temple period that Yeshua ministered in said that if you have not forgiven men their sins, then you can't expect your sins forgiven on Yom Kippur. Because you got to remember, our Jewish people teach, and it's actually true, that all of the sins of Israel were dealt with on Yom Kippur. Because what you had is a sacrificial system that people should have been coming up when they sin and making an offering for their sins and dealing with their own sins, but they would get busy with life and they wouldn't do it. And they actually had people they actually dealt with, and I've heard believers say this: I'll just wait until the last minute and ask God to forgive me, and then I'll be okay because I know how forgiving he is. Well, they actually taught in the first century and before that attitude would render your plea for forgiveness useless. So don't expect to be forgiven if you're taking that attitude, okay? And so all of that is actually dealt with in the Mishnah. And so what we're doing here in Vidui al-Chait, the forgiveness of sins, is if we're just saying a prayer, then that's all we're doing is saying a prayer and we're just making noise. But if we are genuinely contrite and asking Elohim to forgive us of our sins, then he is like we just read from 1 John, faithful and just to forgive us our sins. I'm not going to read Vidui. You can read it for yourself, and we will be reading it in the synagogue anyway. And then we read out of Tehillah, Psalm 103. Bless Yahweh, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his consecrated name. Bless Yahweh, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. Who forgives all your iniquity, who heals all your diseases, who redeems your life from the pit, who encompasses you with compassion and tender mercies. And so this is a plea to Elohim for his compassion, his mercy on this great day. And this day is called the Yoma, great day. And so the day of Yahweh, you might say. And so there's still debate even in my own mind. I personally believe that Yom Kippur is that day on the calendar year of man, but the 7th millennium is that day on the prophetic calendar. And so, but nonetheless, certainly the biggest day that is ever going to be in history is going to be the day that Yeshua puts his foot down. The day, and of course we as believers are looking forward to the day of being caught up and snatched up into heaven. But that, and as wonderful as that is going to be, it's going to be nothing like returning with him and having all mankind finally do what the scriptures say we're going to do, and that is confess that he is Yahweh Yeshua HaMashiach to the glory of Elohim, his Father. That's going to happen on Yom Kippur. And it's going to happen after many, 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 many millions of people die in their iniquity, transgression, and sin. And so it's going to make all of us, I believe, personally very grateful for his forgiveness for our iniquity, transgression, and sin. And so that's what Yom Kippur should invoke out of us. And then we in the Messianic community read out of Ephesians 1, 3 through 10, and then 3, 20 through 21. Baruch Elohim ha'av av Adonenu Yeshua HaMashiach. Bless God, the Father of our Master Yeshua the Messiah, who has blessed us with all spiritual blessings in heaven through Mashiach, since as from the beginning he has chosen us through him before the foundation of the world, that we may become consecrated and without blemish before him in love, as at the first for himself. Marked us for him and appointed us to be sons through Yeshua HaMashiach, as was the pleasure of his will, to the praise of the glory of his compassion, that he has poured upon us by his beloved one. In him we have redemption, and in his blood forgiveness of sins, according to the richness of his compassion, which has abounded in us all in all wisdom and spiritual understanding. And he has made known to us the sod, the mystery of his will, that he has ordained from the very beginning to work through it. He did so in the stewardship of the fullness of times, that all things might be made new in heaven and on earth through Mashiach. Now to him who is able by power to do for us more than anyone else, and to do for us more than we ask or think, according to his mighty power that works in us, unto him be glory in his assembly by Yeshua HaMashiach through all ages, forever and ever. Amen. And then we read Korintheim Bet, 2 Corinthians 5:21, which we also read on every Shabbat. For he who did not know sin, for your sakes, made himself a chatat, that we may through him be made the tzedakah of Elohim. And one of the offerings, and if I'm not mistaken, it's that first goat, becomes the chatat, the sin offering. And that's the one that is offered for all of Israel. And so Yeshua has become our chatat. And of course, people have butchered that verse. Even in the King James it says, and he has become sin. That's not what it says in the Aramaic, and that's not what it would say in the Greek. He has become a chatat, a sin offering for us. And that matches other scriptures that help us interpret that, even if you had the language wrong. We're told he is our once and final sacrifice. Okay? That we may through him be made the tzedakah of Elohim. And then we add, and Yeshua said, be of good cheer, my son, your sins are forgiven you. And so that is basically it on Yom Kippur. And the reason is we are dressed in white and we are fasting. And I think we covered the fasting already last week. If someone remembers, give me a thumbs up or something. But it is a complete and utter fast. It's a fast from everything. From food and water. From any kind of rejoicing, from any kind of self-indulgence whatsoever. We dress in white when we go to the synagogue. But there are, as always, there are exceptions to these ordinances because God is compassionate and he understands our human condition. And so when you read in the Mishnah, you find out that there was permission for one of the things is, which to me shows real compassion, is the sages of antiquity taught that if a pregnant woman smells food, let her eat. And a person who is about to pass out, if he's sick, he can be ministered to, and he can eat the food the size, the total. If it's more than one type of food, then the total of it, the computation of it, has to add up to no more than a date. And a date, an Israeli date from a date palm, I'm assuming, would be, if I'm not mistaken, about that big around. So it's not a lot of food, but nonetheless, it would get a person who's about to pass out through. And what if you don't have white clothing? Well, then I suppose buy some. What most men do, Joe, because white clothes for men is kind of hard to find, is white carpenter pants or painter's pants. They still make white painter's pants. I happened to get lucky a few years ago and find some white medical slacks, a doctor's slacks. But it is compulsory to wear white in the synagogue when you're there for Yom Kippur. And even our tallit has to be white. Some people won't even wear a tallit because of that law. They will wear a tallit katan and then a robe. There's a certain type of robe that some Jewish people wear. I'm not all about that, but I actually have a white tallit. So anyway, so our fast begins, just like Vayikra 23 says, on the evening of the 9th day of the Chodesh. And so we stop eating, we stop drinking anything. Our teeth have to be brushed before then. You don't brush your teeth when you get up in the morning. You're really not supposed to put any oils or anything in your hair. You should have that tended as much as you can before you end the day before, and then just kind of make it presentable the next day. Nobody's looking at you anyway. They're too busy starving to death. But the affliction of the body is for the affliction of the soul. It's to make you realize the severity of the day and to focus yourself on Elohim and to focus yourself on the fact that you are seeking atonement. And of course, because we already have it, why is it, I'm going to ask a question, and I know we have some lag time, but I'm going to ask a question. Why is it that we, pardon me for just a second, why is it that we, as believers in Messiah, should yet go ahead and fast on Yom Kippur? And Betsy, if you have a notion about that, feel free to jump in. That'll fill the lag time.
To appreciate what was done for us, to spend the time in prayer, not to be spending that time taking care of ourselves.
So I don't know if you can hear, but she said to appreciate what was done for us, spend that time in prayer, and then what else?
And not actually doing those things for us. Instead of eating,
instead of indulging.
Yeah.
Right, and so all of those are right, but I'm going to add to that. Yes, it's to afflict ourselves, Ginger, but the point that I'm making is I believe that it's an opportunity for us to intercede on behalf of the world so that maybe we can reduce the number of people who will not be forgiven. Maybe through our prayers and our becoming closer to Elohim, we will be more effective in ministry. We will understand the severity of the judgment that is coming on the world, especially when you read the book of the Hikkalut. If you believe that book is going to happen, it should change your life. And maybe that's what has driven me, because for the last 30, 40 years, is I actually believe that book is going to happen. And I believe that it could happen. I believe that it could happen very soon. And if it's happening very soon, and it requires tzedakah, righteousness, to participate in that, and it requires actual teshuvah to not suffer the judgment, then based on my little pea brain, a lot of people are going to perish. A lot of people are going to spend eternity apart from God and in suffering and constantly remembering their sin and constantly knowing that they could have been in the presence of God for eternity, but they chose not to. And so I think that's why we should afflict ourselves on Yom Kippur. And that little tiny amount of suffering, because for some people, fasting is very, very hard. I fast frequently, and so it's not as hard for me. I have a weird body anyway. My stomach is made of iron, and I can get through it. I am exhausted at the end of Yom Kippur, and I'm starving to death, and I'm ready to eat. But by the time the sun goes down the next day, some people just have a really hard time of it. Yes, they should perish for disobedience, but I think it should be in our hearts not to want them to.
So should we.
Because it could easily be us who are also perishing, but for the compassion of Messiah, we'd be with them. So, and I believe there's a lot of people out there who can be rescued. Yeshua said it. The fields are white unto harvest. He said that 2,000 years ago. Let's see. We may roll into Sukkot tonight. Let me think. There's some more things about Yom Kippur that I wanted to tell you, though. So I mentioned the Urim and the Tumim. For some reason, it's the tractate Yoma that actually talks about this. It talks about the Urim veTumim, and what that is it's a combination of things that the Kohen wears. And the tractate Yoma, the part of the Mishnah that talks about Yom Kippur, for some reason, it talks about this in the Yom Kippur section. And it's talking about the clothing of the Kohanim. And so it says that all the Kohanim wear 4 pieces of clothing all the time. And it's basically the robe and the girdle and the sash or the belt and the linen headdress. But then some things are added to the Kohen Gadol, and that is that ephod and the metal breastplate and the shoulder pins and the crown. He has a turban, but his turban has a crown on it. And so he has 4 things added to his uniform, if you will. And so for some reason right here, it mentions the Urim veTumim. And so you have it documented in history what that is. And so many people, I can remember reading the scriptures and go, what the heck is Urim and Thummim? And I'd hear preachers read the passage about it, and they'd say Urim and Thummim in a redneck way and just blow on and not mention it and not say anything about it. And it's mentioned in the scriptures. It's not something that mankind or the Jewish people made up. But we have to understand that our Jewish people are the only ones who can explain it because it was given to them. And so, why on Yom Kippur is this explained? This is a very mystical mystical thing that doesn't have a lot of explanation in it. You can't glean from scriptures what it actually did, except that it was a method of communicating with God. It was a means of getting an answer from God through the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. Okay, I have a question. Let me see. Well, you spelled parish wrong there, Jeanette. I don't think anyone could fathom the eternal torment of the soul. Okay, you typed a little too much, so I can't see the rest of it. But yes, you're on the right track there.
I don't think anyone could fathom the eternal torment of the soul. Pray for them.
Yeah. So I think what she's doing is going back to my question. That's kind of where I was going. We're not praying for them to be able to get through hell. We're praying that they not have to go, if at all possible, that we save as many as we can. So really it's a prayer for us being more effective in our ministry, getting closer to God so that we can be more effective. And actually that we care more about people, and understand if we don't declare the gospel, people are perishing. They're dying. They're perishing forever. So where was I? Urim vetumim. So for some reason it's explained on Yom Kippur. Theoretically, you would never have to go to war on Yom Kippur. Most of the time, other nations tend to try to respect the high days, but not in the case of Israel. As a matter of fact, in 1967, we had the Yom Kippur War. Was that 67 or 72?
Might have been 72.
I think it was 72. But nonetheless, Israel has had, because 67 was on Shavuot. The 67 war happened on Shavuot, which is one of the Chags. And then the 72 war, which I can't remember what 73 is called the Yom Kippur War because it happened on Yom Kippur. But that was one of the main reasons for using the Urim Vetumim, was to consult whether or not to go to war. But it was also used for other things, and we're not given very many examples of it. There's only one example I can think of, and it was David who actually used the Urim Vetumim. And it doesn't explain exactly what happened, but the Mishnah does. So the Urim Vetumim was the combination of the linen ephod, the breastplate, and the stones on the breastplate, and what was spoken and what was answered. And so Urim Vetumim actually means the lights, the plural, it's plural word, the lights, and the purities, if you will. Tam means pure. And so Tumim is plural, the purities, the lights and the purities. Why those words, I don't know, but that's what God called it. I think because it was a clear, indisputable answer that you got back. And I think the light is how the message got back from God. And so the message came back. So what would happen is it was reserved for the king. And the way that the Mishnah reads is someone who needed it, or someone who they needed. So there's some...
Sorry, we're having trouble playing this video. I'm not sure if they're getting you right now.
I think they are.
Okay.
I'm still seeing communication. I forget where I was.
Lights and purities.
So, in the case of David, the reason that I think he approached was to find out whether or not he should go to a war. So he went to the Kohen, or the prophet went to the Kohen and asked, should I go to war? And we're told that he got a positive answer, but we're not told how that message came. And so it's not just a feeling that the Kohen got. His eyes didn't roll back in his head and he got a message from God. That's not what it is. But it's a pure message because only God could send it. And so I call it the first text message, because what actually happened was those stones on the breastplate, we are told in the Mishnah, we're told in the scriptures that they had the names of the 12 sons on the stones. And so there were 12 stones, and there were 4 rows of 3, and Simeon, Reuben, and Levi, and then Judah, and then I would butcher the rest of the order, so I'm not going to attempt the rest of the order because those orders are given in several different ways through the scriptures. But nonetheless, all the 12 sons are on those stones. But there's also Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and then one other phrase. And with all of those phrases and names, and I'll try to think of that phrase, but all of those names and that one little phrase, carved into those different colored stones, had every letter of the Hebrew alphabet on it. And the letter, the answer to the question, whatever the priest or the king, whatever the king or the prophet asked of the Kohen Gadol, the answers to that would light up in those stones. And so only God could cause that. And so part of it was, our Jewish people tell us that there was a phrase from Exodus 12 written on a parchment, and they call it the 72-letter name of God. I think we're misunderstanding that, but nonetheless, there was a phrase out of the Exodus that was written on a piece of parchment and put in a pouch in that linen ephod under the breastplate, and that was one of the things that contributed to this whole process. But the pure answer would come back because it was coming straight from God. Only he could actually light those letters up. And then the Kohen had to, or whoever was asking the question had to read it. And so, yes, it was the letters lit up. And so why we are told that on Yom Kippur, I'm not 100% sure, except to say that we don't get our purity. I think the reason that it's given on Yom Kippur is because if you don't get your forgiveness on Yom Kippur, then you're not going to go forward with God's presence in such a way that he's going to respond to you like that. And so maybe that's why we don't hear about the Urim Vetumim very much. Maybe that's why they were unable to use it, because they never actually followed through with all the rites the way they were supposed to. And you see that's the very reason why Yeshua showed up when he did, is because Judaism was in a mess again after a mere 200 and some odd years of having recovered from the Hasmonean issue. And then, and that was only a few hundred years after recovering from the Babylonian issue. And that was only a few hundred years after recovering from the Assyrian issue. And go back before that, and you're dealing with the Philistines and the Midianites, so and all of those people, all of those issues were brought on Israel because of their disobedience. And so, go ahead.
Was Shiftei Yeshurun, tribes of Yeshurun.
Say again?
Shiftei Yeshurun.
Yes, Shiftei Yeshurun. That's right. That's the other phrase. Thank you. That's the other phrase that was on the Urim, or on the breastplate, on the stones. Okay. Let's see. Is there anything else about Yom Kippur that I need to tell you? Any questions about Yom Kippur before we move on?
Someone else did their light up talking about the Urim and Thummim.
Yeah, the Urim Vetumim again is not. There's not one object that is that. Technically, I guess it's the parchment under the breastplate that would be the object that relates to Urim Vetumim, because he had to wear the breastplate anyway. But I guess the Jewish answer is it's that parchment. But I personally believe it's the whole scenario. It's the whole process. It's that parchment. It's the asking of the question. It's the receiving of the answer.
Could Yom Kippur, the Urim and Thummim, suggest that one day we'll be able to ask God questions directly, that Yeshua will be there and will speak to us?
That could be actually, yes, what it's alluding to, because even in our portion this week, we're told to establish judges, and the judges are supposed to answer all the issues and settle arguments between, disputes between the people. But it says if a matter is too hard for you, then you go up to the Kohen. and you go to Jerusalem, the place where I shall put my name, and you go up to the Kohen Gadol, and you inquire of him, and he will hand the judgment down according to the Torah, and his judgment will be firm, and you're not to rebel against it. And so that could be what it's alluding to, is because that's why a king would go up to the Kohen and ask such a question, is because he just doesn't know the answer. He doesn't have wisdom to know the answer. And so yes, that could be what that is an image of, is that, it says now that we know in part, but then we will know fully, even face to face. And so that could be why we're given that on Yom Kippur, because at that day when Yeshua puts his foot down on the earth and stands before God and everybody and declares himself of who he is, and we all bow down to him and call him by his name, there will be no question. And we will be able to go up to him face to face and ask, and he will tell us what the actual truth is. And it actually says that he will declare the truth, and he will settle all disputes. And so yeah, that's actually a very good observation. No questions coming from the peanut gallery out there.
Daniel Project, we don't share the gospel, people perish. What concept?
Yep. I don't want it to be on our heads that we didn't make an effort to spread the good news. That's right. Well, we're either done or we're going to go into Sukkot. We've got 1 hour left. So it seems to me like we've already kind of did the summary overview of Sukkot, of all these feasts in the past in this study. So I'm going to do a similar thing, and that is walk through the liturgy and then explain our traditions and what we do. And then we'll kind of have some questions along the way, I suppose. Hopefully everybody's still there. So we're in Sukkot. When is Sukkot? Sukkot is spoken of in the similar places, Vayikra 23 and again in the book of Numbers. I want to say it's Numbers chapter 16, but I'm not 100% sure of that. Where all the 3 Chag feasts are spoken of. But Sukkot is on the 15th day of the 7th Chodesh. So it is 5 days after Yom Kippur. And so we will go to Vayikra 23 to read that. I can get my iPad to respond. Yeah, Vayikra chapter 23, we're in verse 33. And the Yeshua spoke unto Moshe, saying, Speak unto Bnei Israel, saying, On the 15th day of this 7th Chodesh is Chag HaSukkot. Shivat Yamim unto Yahweh, 7 days unto Yahweh. On the first day shall be a Mikra Kodesh. You shall do no manner of regular work. 7 days you shall bring a carbon of fire unto Yahweh. On the 8th day shall be a Mikra Kodesh unto you, and you shall bring a carbon of fire unto Yahweh. So twice we're bringing that. That could be an allusion to the 2 wives again. It is a festive assembly. You shall do no manner of regular work. These are the Moedim of Yahweh, which you shall proclaim to be Mikra Kodesh, to bring a carbon of fire unto Yahweh, an olah, a mincha, a zavach, a nesech, each on its own day, besides the Sabbaths of Yahweh, and beside your gifts, and beside all your vows, and beside all your free will offerings which you give unto Yahweh. However, on the 15th day of the 7th Chodesh, when you have gathered in the fruits of the land. I want you to see this. This is called the Festival of Ingathering. And so this is what Yeshua is often talking about when he's talking about harvest and ingathering. He's talking about Sukkot. Okay? He's borrowing from Sukkot to give us that imagery. When you have gathered in the fruits of the land, you shall keep the Chag of Yahweh 7 days. On the first day shall be a Shabbaton, that is a high Sabbath, because it can fall on any day of the week, but it's still a Sabbath. And on the 8th day shall be a Shabbaton. That's the day that Yeshua was circumcised. The first day was a high Sabbath. That's the day that Yeshua was born. The 8th day was a high Sabbath. That's the day that he was circumcised. You shall take on the first day the fruit of majestic trees, branches of palm trees, boughs of thick leafy trees, and willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before Yahweh your Elohim 7 days. That is what we call the Lulav. And that is a collection of fruit from all over the land, of branches, plant life, from all over the land of Israel, from north and south and east and west. Each of those things grows in a different area of Israel. And you're bringing them from all of the different parts of Israel and bringing them together and bundling them together into what's called a lulav and rejoicing. It's like what we would call a pom-pom. It's, most everybody on here is probably familiar with it, but there's a few I think that are not. So it's a palm branch that is about 3 to 4 feet tall, and it hasn't budded out yet. It looks like a spine. It's straight up, and it's got a branch of a myrtle tree, and that gives you some leafy activity, and it's about usually half the height of the palm branch. And then it's the willow, and it's probably about between the myrtle and the palm in height, and it's just mostly leaves, but the leaves are a little bit bigger, and they make a little bit of a noise when you shake the lulav. And then the fourth thing is what is an etrog, which is the citrus tree, which is actually what the Torah says, but it's a particular type of Israeli citrus, which is called an etrog, which looks like a huge lemon. And you have to really find the best etrog in order to get any real fruit out of it where it actually tastes good, because most etrogs that I've eaten, not interested, but they all do have a very good smell. And so you bring all of these fruits of the land together into one place, and I used to teach it and I still do. I think it's a lesson of getting a hold of yourself, of you becoming echad in yourself. Unify me. There's a psalm, I wish I could remember which one it is, but there is a psalm that says, unify me that I may rejoice before you, or that I may be good in your sight, or something to that effect. And so this is a picture of us getting a hold of everything that we are in our existence as a human being and rejoicing before Elohim. And so the way that Sukkot is described in the Mishnah is that it is a day that is so full of revelry and excitement that you've never seen anything like it. And people in antiquity who used to go to Israel on this day were surprised at the level of rejoicing, at the level of excitement and revelry and just rejoicing and shouting and the unity of Israel in doing these rites together. It had to be a sight to behold. And so if you go to a synagogue that understands this and does it right, then you can see that and experience that in a small way. But they used to gather in the temple with these lulavim at certain hours of the day and shake those lulavim and rejoice and sing. And they used to fight over their lulav when it was time to take it up, because you'd put it down at certain times, and then you went and searched for the best palm branch and the best myrtle branch and the best etrog and all this, and you set it down, and someone else took it, and they've actually gotten in fights over them. It's actually recorded in the Mishnah that they would fight over the lulav. And so it was really something to rejoice over. Psalm 86:11. Thank you. So and I believe that was in reference to unify me. Okay, yeah, Psalm 86:11 is where that is. And so that's what the Lulav represents, is the nation of Israel coming together, and every individual in Israel getting a hold of himself, loving the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, and your strength. Is it interesting that the Shema actually only says 3 things, but when Yeshua said it, he said 4 things, and the Lulav is 4 parts. Okay? Your heart, your mind, and your soul, and your might. Okay? The Lulav, the etrog, is supposed to represent the heart. The willow, because of the shape of its leaves, is supposed to represent the mouth, the lips. The myrtle, because of the shape of its leaves, is supposed to represent the eye. And then the palm branch, because of the way that it's shaped, and it's not spread out yet, it's like a spear. As a matter of fact, it's kind of dangerous. It could be used as a spear because they have the date palms of Israel like that are pointy. And that represents the spine. And so you're bringing your whole body together, and you're forcing yourself to rejoice. And so I'll never forget the first time that I did this with a bunch of brand new Messianic Gentiles who'd become Messianic, and they'd never seen Sukkot before, and I'm trying to coach them, teach them how to use the Lulav, and it was the most awkward situation. Because people are like, really? We're really going to do this? And if you think about it, a Jewish child growing up in Israel watching this probably couldn't wait to grab a hold of that thing. This was natural to them. They'd seen it their whole lives. They're taught it during their bar mitzvah training for 12 years. Actually from the time they're about 6 years old. So 7 years, they're taught about it. And they're watching Dad do it, and Dad's rejoicing. They don't have any shame in it because they've done it their whole lives. But for Gentiles to do it for the first time, it's strange. It's very strange to do. But I think especially for people who were taught like myself and the family that I came from and the religious background that my family had for hundreds of years, which was Baptist, where you are reverent all the time and you don't go hog wild in church. You sit there reverently and you don't say a word, you don't make a sound, to stand there and shake this thing and even dance. It goes against our nature, it goes against what's ingrained into us. And so it's really a thing that you have to kind of prepare yourself for the first time that you do it. Let's see. So I think the Lulav is probably the weirdest thing that we do on Sukkot. But along with that is building a booth. And so that is what the word Sukkot actually means, is booths. And that's plural, B-O-O-T-H with an S on the end of it. And so we are building a little shelter that has at least 3 walls on it and a natural roof that you can kind of see through, that is made of freshly cut branches. And so when you're out gathering your species, your 4 species for the Lulav, then you're also gathering branches to cover your sukkah that you're going to live in for 7 days. That is a picture of the temporal nature of our life on earth. We've talked about it. We talked about it in our Instagram session on Monday night. We've talked about it in this study a few times, and that is the World Week, that God has reserved 7,000 years for the world, for mankind. And so Sukkot is living that whole 7,000-year millennium, or set of millennia, living it out in microcosm for 7 days every year, with an 8th day of fantastic rejoicing without the Lulav at this point. And that 8th day is symbolic of the millennium. As a matter of fact, both the number 8 in the Greco-Roman numbering system is a symbol of infinity. You flip it on its side, and mathematically, that is the symbol for infinity in mathematics. And that is also true of the 8th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which is Chet, which is the first letter in Chai, which is life. And so life in Messiah is eternal. And so 8 is the symbol of eternal life. And that is actually the symbol that we put on the dalet, on the door, on the delet, on the door of the houses at Passover. That was a chet. You have a lot of, you'll see come around the time of Passover, Christians will be putting a cross on their door and saying, this is what they did at Passover. No, it's not. It was on the side posts and the lintel at the top. And that is the picture of a chet, the 8th letter, which is eternal life, which we get from the blood of Yeshua. But so Sukkot, we live in that booth for 7 days. And then we don't live in the booth anymore. We're not permitted to live in that booth beyond 7 days. But on the 8th day, we assemble and we rejoice. It's called Shemini Atzeret, the 8th festivity. And Atzeret means great festivity. And so it looks, the way it reads in some translations, it looks like it's supposed to be somber. No, it's not. You are supposed to cut loose on Simchat Torah, the day of rejoicing in the Torah. And it's even bigger rejoicing than what you did for the 7 days. But let's back up to the 7 days. And so we have 5 days after Yom Kippur, we're getting our booth ready during that 5 days. You actually kind of have 4 days, I think, at the end of Yom Kippur up to the beginning of the 15th. And you have, I think, 4 days to prepare to get your booth ready, to get your Lulav ready. And then that evening, that first evening on the 15th of the month, which is when the moon is full, you begin to dwell in your booth. And you wave your Lulav for the first time in your booth. And you dwell in your booth. You sit out there and you have dinner. You've built your booth. Let's talk about that briefly. And I know I'm bouncing around a little bit, and I'm sorry for that. But, no Zoom, no interaction. It's a little harder to do this way, I think. But you can build, a lot of people build their booth off the back of their house. That's perfectly permissible, where you only have to build 2 walls or even 1 because you have an L shape on your back patio, or you have you have an L shape and it's not covered, so you can put some kind of cover there, put your branches up there, and make your back patio your booth. That's perfectly permissible. A lot of Messianic communities, for some reason, I don't know why they do it, but they go away and they have Sukkot in a campground, and they don't even build booths, from what I understand. Some of them do, but most of them don't. They don't even build booths. We don't do that. I never have, and I probably never will. And the simple reason is because I believe this is the time. Sukkot is for all the nations. And so why should the Messianic community go and hide from the rest of the world on Sukkot when this is supposed to be the time that we're declaring the birth of Yeshua? We're declaring the Besorah in a very clear way. We're declaring the age, the age of mankind in a very clear way. We're building a booth in our backyard, and our neighbors are going, Mrs. Kravitz is over there going, George, what are they doing? It's a perfect opportunity to minister to our neighbors around us, because they are going to ask you questions about it. Let's see.
Ginger's asking about the building requirements.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to do right now. Not to be a wimp, but how long do you stay out there? It's a little warm outside. Well, that depends on how big of a wimp you are. No, it's cooler. Typically, when Sukkot comes, sometimes in Texas it can be sweltering, but many times it can be cooler, and many times even a little bit too cold to stay out there. So it just depends on when in the year it actually is and what the weather does that year. So yes, at least eat your meals in it. At least sit out there and have dinner in it each evening, and maybe coffee in the morning. And if you have to go to work, because the only days that are high days are day 1 and day 8. So the 7 days of sitting in the sukkah are only one of them is mandatory to be a high day where you're not going to work. So you have 6 days where you could go to work. You don't have to, but you probably have to because you have a boss and he didn't give you those 6 days off. So you're going to work every day, so you're not going to be able to eat lunch in it, but you can take at least one meal in it. And some people like to spend the night out there. Some people put a cot in there and spend the night. It just depends. You can, if you build the booth tight enough, you could probably put your little fan in there and a little air conditioner in there and sleep in there. Some people get pretty crazy with it.
Kids love to decorate it.
Kids love to decorate it. My wife loves to decorate it. There are the Sukkah Project. If you go there, they have a lot of good ideas and good Sukkah material, including beautiful decorations for the inside. So as much time as possible, at least. Well, I don't know what you mean by at least 2 days. You don't have to spend all day out there, but you have to dwell in it. Actually, it says yashav, which means to sit. So go sit in your booth. It's not. There's not going to be a clock. God's not pushing a clock. You didn't spend enough time in your sukkah. That's not the spirit of it.
It's fun.
The spirit of it is you're going to want to do it.
Yeah.
You built it. You're going to want to do it. Especially if you had kids, they're going to want to do it. Your kids are going to want to spend the night out there. If you can pull it off, pull it off. So when is it? So Yom Teruah is on the 18th of September this year. Sukkot is in early October, so it's going to be cool. I don't remember exactly when it is. I'd have to look. If you look on Mikdash Me'at on the Parsha page, the days are actually there. So
what about the inviting people in
yes,
concept?
yeah, I'll get to that, and if I don't, remind me.
And also the directions of shaking the lulav.
Yeah, so Ginger's question about building it, I think I covered that a little bit, but got derailed a little bit by some of the questions, or maybe my own mind. But it needs 3 walls and an entrance. If you look on the Sukkah Project, you can get ideas about how to build your own. The Sukkah Project actually has materials that you can buy and kits for your sukkah that you can buy. We actually bought a kit, and so ours has 4 walls on it. We just fold back, and they're made of a tent material that's kind of waterproof, and we actually fold it back because we like it to be open in there. But you would at least need 3 walls. So it looks kind of like what we used to call a lean-to in East Texas, where you feed your horse. No, Carolyn, Yom Teruah is the day that no man knows. And then the branches that you need to cut just need to be freshly cut branches. They can't be old dead branches. They need to be freshly cut. They will die, depending on the weather. They will die while they're up there, but they need to be green when you put them up there. 3 walls. You need to be walled in. You got to think about living in the desert, because that's what these were. These were booths that they lived in while they were encamped around the tabernacle in the desert for 40 years. So we're commemorating that, but we're also commemorating our temporal life on this earth as mortals for 6,000 years, 7,000 years, because you got to remember there are some mortals on the earth for that last 1,000 years. So we're commemorating and remembering that we are mortal and temporal, and then we go into eternity. That's what Simchat Torah is. So we're commemorating that by these temporary houses that are going to go away. You're going to put it up. That's commemorative of God creating the world, and you're going to take it down. That's commemorative of God who's going to roll up the universe like a scroll. And so that's what that is a picture of. And you're going to do that on the 7th day. Once that 7th day is done, probably the 8th day, you'll either do it that evening, the end of the 7th day before the 8th evening, you'll take it down, or you'll wait until the 8th day and take it down. But you can't dwell in it on the 8th day. So that's symbolic of Elohim rolling up the universe and doing away with it and creating a new heaven and a new earth and living on the other side of that for eternity. That's what this is living out for us. That's what we're practicing for. And so that booth, I hope I've covered that question of Ginger. 3 walls, and one of those walls can be permanent, any configuration. A natural roof that's made out of branches, that's the only requirements, really. Any requirements beyond that, and you're just getting into legalism and ridiculousness. Okay. So let me get to our Siddur. And just like on Yom Teruah and Yom Kippur, we read the command for actually keeping Sukkot first, which I just read. And then the next scripture we read is out of Yeshayahu, and Yahweh will create over the whole habitation of Har Zion and over her assemblies a cloud and smoke by day, the shining of a flaming fire by night, for over all the glory shall be a canopy. And there shall be a sukkah for a shadow in the daytime from the heat, and for a refuge, and for a covert from storm and from rain. And that's a prophecy out of Isaiah chapter 4. And then we read what we are reading right now, which is one of my favorite Psalms, and it's part of our Teshuvah prayers right now, Tehillah 27, Psalm 27. Ki yitzpeneni besuko beyom ra'a yastireni beseter ohalo bitsur hiromemeni ve'ata yarum roshi al oivai sevivotai ve'ezbecha ve'ahalo zivchei teruah ashira azamra la yerah. For he conceals me in his sukkah in the day of evil. He hides me in the covert of his ohel. He lifts me up upon a rock, and now my head will be lifted up above my enemies round about. And I will offer in his ohel sacrifices with a blast. I will sing, yes, I will sing praises unto Yahweh. So that's actually part of our Sukkot liturgy, but it was also part of Yom Kippur. Because Yom Kippur is when we enter into the sukkah above. So that's another thing that this is foreshadowing, is being in the cheder, in the chuppah, in the sukkah. Betsy's going to have to read me the rest of Jamal's comment. I can't read it all.
I'm not sure, but I've heard before some of the Bible was commanded to eat dandelions during the time of Sukkot.
I'd have to look that up. It seems like I remember that, but I'm drawing a blank myself, so we'll have to look that up. So the people went forth and made themselves Sukkot, everyone upon the roof of his house and in their courts. And this is coming out of Nehemiah, and this is very interesting. And in the courts of Beit Elohim, and in the broad place of the water gate, and in the broad place of the gate of Ephraim, and all the congregation of them that were come back out of the captivity made Sukkot, booths, and dwelt in the Sukkot. For since the days of Yeshua ben Nun unto that day had not Bnei Yisrael done so. And there was very great gladness. Also, day by day, from the first day unto the last, he read in the book of the Torah of Elohim, and they kept the Chag 7 days, and on the 8th day, Atzeret, on Shemini Atzeret, according to the ordinance. And that's from Nehemiah 8, 16 through 18. And I find that very, very interesting, because from the time of Yeshua ben Nun, and it does say Yeshua there in Hebrew. This is important. Hopefully, I want to take this slow because I want everybody to get this. From the time of Yeshua ben Nun, what is that talking about? Nehemiah was right behind Ezra in rebuilding the temple and the walls of Jerusalem and resetting up the worship of David, of establishing the worship in the temple again after it had been laid bare for 70 years. And so you would think that after returning from Bavel, all they would have to worry about is having missed 70 years of Sukkot. But that's not what it says. And the prophets bear this out. So this is telling us that for from the very beginning of their existence as a nation, they kept Sukkot one time with Joshua. And here he's called Yeshua. And they didn't keep it again until they came back from captivity in Bavel. And look at Christianity. They were keeping Sukkot in the time of the Shlichim. They were observing all the feasts. We see that. Kepha, Shaul, they all observed all the feasts. There's a couple of times I think Sukkot is even mentioned in the book of Acts. I'd have to look. Nonetheless, we can infer and glean from all the Brit Chadashah scriptures that they kept the feasts. And I personally believe they kept them, the whole believing community kept them all the way up through 325 AD when Constantine took over and made it illegal to do so. And moved the feasts. And he moved Sukkot to Christmas. And so the believing community has not kept Sukkot from the time of Yeshua until the time of the destruction of Bavel that happens in the book of Revelation. Did y'all get the impact of that? Are you seeing what I'm talking about? Are you seeing why I think this is very, very powerful here? Nehemiah is saying that they rejoiced so much because they had not kept Sukkot for roughly 1,000 years. And here we are, 2,000 years removed from our Yeshua, and it calls him Yeshua. It calls Yehoshua Yeshua. Yes, Joe put it up there. Yeshua is a short form of Yehoshua. It is a Hebrew word that is Yehoshua, but it is Yeshua's name. So I don't think that that's a mistake. I don't think that God did that accidentally of calling him Yeshua ben Nun from the time of Yeshua ben Nun until returning from Bavel. They had not kept Sukkot, just like the believing community has not, by and large, has not kept Sukkot since the time of Yeshua, effectively, up until the destruction of Bavel. And our ministry, we have been all about calling people out of Bavel. Come out from her, my people. And Bavel is represented, Ishtar was birthed in Bavel, Babylon. That's the deity that was born in Babylon, if you will, that was created in Bavel, is Easter, Ishtar. And that is the mother of Mithras, which was born on December 25th. And so there has to be a link between what we're just reading here about Nehemiah and effectively what we're seeing in the book of Revelation, because the last thing that is destroyed before Yeshua puts his foot down is Bavel in the book of the Hikalut. And then Yeshua deals with the beast. And Bavel is mixture religion. That's what it is. That's what happened at Bavel back in Genesis chapter 11 with Nimrod. He threw off God, and that's where I think the name of the woman deity there is Semiramis. Am I right? Is Semiramis, and she and her two other parts are the first Trinity. That's where Trinity was created. Was it at Bavel? And that the idea of a woman giving birth to a demigod was created there, and it was a bastardization of what Yeshua would do in order to confuse people. That's what the word Bavel means, is confusion. And so I think that there is something very, and this is traditional Jewish liturgy to be read, or actually I think it's Messianic liturgy to be read on Sukkot to remember this. And then we also read V'hadavar niye vasar v'shachan banu, and Hadavar, the word of God, the word became a body and dwelt among us. And then also on Sukkot, we're going to read the first 7 Psalms of Ascent, and on Simchat Torah, Shemini Atzeret, then we'll read the last 8 Psalms of Ascent. And then on Shabbat Sukkot, we read Yechezkel 37 through 39. That's the Sabbath that occurs during Sukkot. So that is the synagogue liturgy for Sukkot. But there's more liturgy to do because this is a 7-day feast, most of which is conducted in our homes. And so on the first night, we will read all of this. I do at our home, from starting on page 190 up to and through 193, entering the Sukkah. So everything we do in Messianic Judaism, just like in Judaism, we bless it before it and after it. So we're blessing the entering of the Sukkah on page 193. And then we bless the fact that we have entered into this season on page 194. And then we bless the waving of the Lulav, and we actually wave it in our Sukkah. So a good thing to do to make the kids get into it is put on some good Messianic music and wave the Sukkah through that song, just a short song, or just sing something and wave the Lulav and teach them to rejoice. But the next thing is that we as Messianic people do that most Jews are not going to do, and some other Messianic, I don't know of other Messianic communities that do this, but we read out of Luke chapter 2, which is in the Siddur for convenience sake. And I want to show you something. I'm not going to read all of it, but it's on page 195 in our revised Siddur. So I'm not going to read all of it, but it's basically the story of the birth of Yeshua. And so it says that Yosef also went up from Nazareth, a city of the Galilee, to Yehudah, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and family of David with his betrothed Miriam while she was with child, that they may be registered there. What is this talking about? Everybody knows this. It was a time of the census, the Roman census. And so, Yosef responded and went to Bethlehem because of the census. But why did he go at this particular time? Because what most people don't know, and I have to look back in history. It's been a long time since I read it, but I have read it. But they were given either 1 year or 2 years in order to register for the census. It wasn't like you had to go. It wasn't the April 15th cutoff date where you had to have your taxes in. You had some time because things moved slow back then. We think in the terms of postal services that fly mail by plane. And we impose that over history. That's not how it was. These people had to have time because it took time. And so his hometown was Bethlehem. Why did he go there at the particular time he did? And would the census have caused Bethlehem to be full of people? Absolutely not. No other year in history, and the census took place probably every 10 years or every so often, or whenever Caesar willed it, probably. It didn't always fill Bethlehem up. Why this particular time? Bethlehem was not full because of the census. Bethlehem was full because of Sukkot. Because Bethlehem, Beit Lechem, the house of bread, is David's village, which was 6 miles or so or less from Jerusalem, where every Jew had to be for Sukkot. And so in Beit Lechem, they were an overflow village. They were a daughter of Zion. They were an overflow village that made fruits and vegetables to sell in Jerusalem so that people in Jerusalem who couldn't farm could eat. So they were one of the daughter cities of Jerusalem. And so overflow from Sukkot would stay in Beit Lechem, which from where Yeshua or where Joseph and Miriam were in Nazareth, to Beit Lechem, they had to go through Jerusalem to get there. So that's why he picked that daughter city. Any sane man from Nazareth would have stayed in one of the... Beit Anya, I believe, is closer on the other side. Beit Anya is, I believe, on the foot of the Mount of Olives, right there, right outside of Jerusalem. But there were many villages, daughter cities around the city of Jerusalem where it would have made better sense for Yosef to stay because he was coming from the northeast. And so let me try to do this. I don't know what y'all are looking at. I don't know how it's reversing. So you have Nazareth up here. You have Jerusalem right about where my head is. And you have Beit Lechem over here. And Nazareth is way up here. Nazareth is way out here. Way out, It's way further away. And so he's traveling, coming down, and he's going to go through Jerusalem to get to Beit Lechem just to register. Or he's going to bypass all these cities. He's going there to register, but he's going there at Sukkot. Okay? So that's why Beit Lechem had no room in the inn. But what they did have was booths. Everybody in Beit Lechem was building their booth. They had already had it built. It was the first night of Sukkot. They probably already had dinner in it because it was late at night when they got there. And he was born at night. He was born on that first night of Sukkot. And it says they brought him. And so I forget what verse this is because I don't have the verses marked in the Siddur. But it says, and she gave birth to her firstborn son, and she wrapped him in strips of cloth. And I'm going to get to that. And laid him in a sukkah. V'hishkiva oto besukkah. And so when I did the first draft of Hadavar, I did not put sukkah because in the Aramaic it did not say it, or I thought it did not say it. But I thought something has to be amiss because I knew I had heard it taught. I think Joseph taught that he was born in a sukkah. So I'm pretty sure that's probably where I heard it, but I wasn't going to presume to change the text if I couldn't prove it by the text. But I found this very good Aramaic dictionary, and I looked up the word that was there in the Aramaic, and this is not Aramaic, I'm looking at the Hebrew. But I looked at the word in the Aramaic and looked up that word, and one of the uses of that word that they other Aramaic translators translated to manger or trough or tray or something like that was actually used for sukkah in the first century in multiple places, in multiple ancient documents. So that word is a sukkah. So I am fully convinced. I have my own comfort level now, 100%, that Yeshua was born in a sukkah. And so I know that Joseph taught that, and I think Joseph also taught that he was put in a food tray that was a custom in Judaism, that they would leave food in the sukkah for travelers, like Miriam and Yosef, which is so effectively what Yeshua and Miriam and Yosef were the ushpizin for that sukkah. And Betsy brought this up a while ago because she knows about ushpizin. Ushpizin is honored guests. And so in Judaism, people like to bring honored guests into their sukkah. And the goal is to bring someone that they don't think deserves it. Okay? And so there is a movie called Ushpizin. Have you ever seen it?
It's crazy.
So if you have not seen the movie Ushpizin, and I know at least one person out there who has not, I compel you to find it and rent it and watch it on the first night of Sukkot with your family. Because it gives you, that is the theme of that movie, is these undeserving wayfarers who spend time in this one Jewish person's sukkah. And you'll see a lot of the things that we're talking about are played out, including the etrog, the search for the etrog, the most beautiful etrog, and the giving of gifts, and the treatment, and almost a picture of redemption in this ushpizin. But Yeshua was an undeserving ushpizin, if you will, because he was from Nazareth. And we learn from the biblical text that Nazareth, can anything good come from there? These are nasty people. That's a little one-horse town. That's Saratoga of Israel. And so Yeshua and Miriam and Yosef are the honored guests in a sukkah that night. And there is no doubt to me that it is Sukkot based on the rest of the text. And so let me read further. A malach of Elohim came to them, to the shepherds. You know about these shepherds. They were watching their flocks at night. And a malach, a messenger of Elohim, came to them, and the kavod Yahweh shone on them, and they were seized with a great fear. That's the shepherds were seized with fear. And a malach said to them, do not be afraid, for behold, I bring you glad tidings of great joy. So I'm going to try to find that in the Hebrew. Ve'amar lahem hamalach, al tefchadu, ki hineni mevaser lachem, simcha gdola asher tiyeh lechol haolam. Simcha gdola, great rejoicing. Simchat Torah, the day of rejoicing in the Torah. This is not the day of rejoicing in the Torah, but he's bringing it to them. The good news of it has arrived. And then he says, for this day born to you in the city of David, that's Beit Lechem, a Moshiach, a Savior, who is Yahweh HaMashiach. And you can't get any more powerful than that. Yahweh HaMashiach. And this is a sign for you. You will find the babe wrapped in strips of cloth and lying in a sukkah. And so the sign was strips of cloth, a baby wrapped in strips of cloth and lying in a sukkah. And then it says, and suddenly there appeared with them a malach, a host of heaven, praising Elohim and saying, glory to Elohim in the highest, and on earth shalom and good hope for the sons of men. Those are sukkah words. Those are Sukkot words. Sukkot in Judaism is known as the season of our joy. How do I have to spell what, Joe? Ushpizin. Ushpizin. If that didn't come out clear, let me know, but it should have. So Sukkot is known as the season of our joy. And that's what the Malach said. I bring to you good tidings of great joy. And then the sign, a biblical sign, has to be meaningful. The strips of cloth there, which most people translate as swaddling cloth, is actually what is used. It's old pieces of linen that are used to make a torch. That's what these strips of cloth, that's what swaddling was. And that's why the English redactors used that word, is because these were torch cloths. They were strips of linen probably about that long. You know, a torch is a piece of wood about that long, and you wrap the linen around it on the end, and you dip it, soak it in oil, and that's how you make a torch. So, like a wick. And so why is that significant on Sukkot? Because just over the hill, those shepherds are on hills outside of Jerusalem. Well, let's talk about that for a second, because shepherds do not take their sheep out into a field to eat grass at night on December 25th in Bethlehem, because it snows in Bethlehem just about every year. And so the timing of this could not be December 25th. Yeshua could not be born on December 25th. So it was the fall. And so I told you Sukkot is going to happen on October this year. It's going to be late September, early October is when it's going to happen. 15 days after Yom Teruah, which is the 18th. Somebody do the math. That's about the 1st or 2nd of October when Sukkot will start. So it's in the fall. So those shepherds dwelling out in the field at night, looking over, hearing about the season of the joy, and knowing that Sukkot is starting that night, they probably had their meal in their sukkah and then took the sheep out, you know, and they're looking over the field, and they're seeing the light of the world over there, because there were 4 huge torches in the temple courtyard, the court of the women, that stood up above the wall of the temple. And you got to remember, the temple is up on a mountain, and from Bethlehem you can see that mountain. And so you see the wall of the temple, and then you see the torch lights above that, and they're lighting up the whole city. They were huge. They had these big, huge bowls, four poles. Each pole had 4 bowls on it, and each bowl, I can't remember it, the Mishnah actually tells you how much oil was in those bowls, but there was a big wick up there, and 4 guys would have to climb ladders with torches in their hand, wrapped in swaddling cloth, to light that thing. And so you had the light of the world in a sukkah, in a booth. You had Yeshua wrapped in torch cloths in a booth, and he is the light of the world. Okay. They go down to Bethlehem to see this thing that has happened, that Yahweh has shown us, and they came hurriedly and found Miriam and Yosef and the babe at rest in the sukkah. When they had seen, they made known the word which was spoken to them concerning the boy. And all who heard it were amazed at things which were spoken by the shepherds. But Miriam treasured all these things in her heart. And the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising Elohim for all that they had seen and heard, as it was spoken to them. And when 8 days were fulfilled to circumcise the child, his name was called Yeshua. For he was named by the Malach before he was conceived in the womb. And so this is showing you that 8 days later, Yeshua was born circumcised on Simchat Torah. And circumcision is when you are assigned your name. And so basically the baby is born. Back then they didn't have ultrasounds. They didn't know if it was going to be a boy or a girl, so they had to wait on the name. So they waited. And if it was a boy, then 8 days they would discuss the name, and then on the 8th day they would assign it to him, and that's part of the blessing. So, thank you, Janet, for that, October 2nd. So, because the 8th day is October 10th, which is my wife and I. That's our anniversary. So, so there you have it. Yeshua was born at Sukkot. He is the light of the world. He was circumcised on the 8th day. All of Israel, think about it, all of Israel was rejoicing in the Torah on the day that Yeshua, the Torah in flesh, was being circumcised and entering into the covenant. That, to me, is very significant. Very significant.
Dancing around the Torah scrolls, right?
Yeah. Dancing around, that's right. Dancing around, spending all day rejoicing in the Word of God. Unfurling the scroll and rolling it back up. So, yeah. And in Messianic circles, we also add Ma'aseh HaShlichim. After this, I will return and I will set up again the Sukkah of David, which has fallen down. And I will repair what has fallen from it, and I will set it up so that a remnant of the sons of man may seek after Yahweh, and also all the Goyim upon whom my name is called. So said Yahweh, who does all these things. The works of Elohim are known from the very beginning. So you have here 2,000 years ago, Yaakov, the brother of Yeshua, standing up, and that's what's going on here. This is from Acts chapter 15. This is Yaakov, Yeshua's brother, standing up and declaring to the Messianic community, we are rebuilding the fallen Sukkah of David. Remember, we just read out of Nehemiah, the rebuilding of the Sukkah of David. Okay? And here we are, the Messianic community. Amos comes along later and says that the Sukkah has fallen and we're going to have to rebuild it. And Yaakov is saying, we're doing that. We're fulfilling prophecy here and rebuilding the fallen Sukkah. Okay? And so for 2,000 years, the Messianic community has been rebuilding the fallen Sukkah of David. Why would we not keep Sukkot? So if they were rebuilding it, we, in the last of the last days, darn sure ought to be rebuilding it, especially when you consider that in Zechariah 14, we're told that for 1,000 years we're going to keep Sukkot, and if we don't, we will be punished. So I think it's important that we do that. And so just to close out the Siddur liturgy, we're going to do that every day. We're going to bless the Sukkah. We're going to enter it. I personally don't read the Messiah being born in the Sukkah. I do that on the first night and that alone. If you want to read it every night, I suppose you could. But then we'll say, you can say farewell to the Sukkah. I don't do it until the 7th day. I don't say farewell to the Sukkah until the 7th day. Vayasu chol hakahal. Okay, and all the congregation of them that were come back out of the captivity made Sukkot and dwelt in the Sukkot. For since the days of Yeshua ben Nun unto that day had not Bnei Israel done so, and there was very great gladness. Also by day by day, from the first day to the last day, he read in the book of the Torah of Elohim. And they kept the Chag 7 days, and on the 8th day, according to the ordinance. And so we're transitioning to the 8th day. We may be finished with this whole study tonight. We've got but a few minutes left. Are there any questions or comments?
I have one.
Go ahead.
Where it says what you just read, I will restore it so that the rest of mankind may seek Yahweh. That is all the Elohim. So it seems to me it should be especially important in this day and time. For the
Say it
whole
again.
world. Where it says, so the rest of mankind may seek Yahweh. I mean, so it should be especially important to
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up.
believers that we're not, you know.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I've said it once, but I didn't hammer it home. Sukkot is for all the nations. And so if you look in Vayikra, Leviticus 23, and I think in another place, but it tells you that there were 70 bulls offered for all 70 nations. And the way it was done, it wasn't 70 in one day. I think it starts with either 14 or 13 on the first day of Sukkot, and the number goes down every day for 7 days. But if you do the math, the total number of bulls offered on each day of Sukkot is 70, and that represents all the nations of the world. And so there is Jewish tradition that there were 70 languages created at Bavel. And so there are 70 bulls offered at Sukkot, which is when Bavel is left behind. Are you with me? So it is for the nations. And of course, Christmas has done that in one way. Because you can go to Japan where they're Buddhists and you'll see Christmas trees. And they may or may not have an idea of what it's about, but most of them don't know the story of Yeshua. They just know that Americans put Christmas trees up and that's a big money-making day, so hey, let's put Christmas trees up. It's the world over. You can go to Muslim countries and see Christmas trees. It's bizarre because they hate Jesus, but they allow that tree, you know. So, but you'll go nowhere and see a sukkah, just about. And that to me is sad. And so, I mean, let's see. What is the rest of Janet's comment? If you don't mind.
Yaakov is blessing his son. Does that have any significance to the end times prayer sheet, chapter 49?
Yeah, it does. I don't. Is there? Well, yeah. That's very. All of that is very end time significant stuff. But I don't know that I want to get in. We don't have time to get into it tonight.
Tracy asks when the tradition of unrolling and rolling back the Torah.
I believe that goes all the way back to Ezra and Nehemiah, and maybe even before that, because they reinstated the worship of David. But I believe that is a Mosaic tradition in the sense of it was done in the synagogues before the captivity to Bavel, and it was done after. But they never dwelt in booths. All it says in Nehemiah is that they had not dwelt in booths. But certainly, at least it goes back to Ezra and Nehemiah. It does go back to the first temple era. So, which is roughly 400 years before and after, across Yeshua's life.
Also, what about a tabernacle is commemorating the time in the desert? The booths in the desert, is there any connection to remembering the coming out of Egypt?
Yeah, I thought I'd said that. If you're not hearing Betsy, she's asking about commemorating the dwelling in booths in the desert. I thought I had said that. It is a commemoration of them dwelling in booths. I did say that when we were talking about how they were built. I said imagine how they were, imagine how they, the necessity of it being in the wilderness. So yeah, it is a commemoration of that, but it's also commemorating and remembering that the very life we have now is temporal, and this time on earth for mankind is temporary. That's what temporal means. And that the millennium is going to be permanent, just like the tabernacle turned into a stone temple. Our booth is going to turn into a permanent house in the new city, and our body is going to turn from mortal to immortal. So that's what Sukkot is all about, is the transferring from temporary to permanent, from perishable to imperishable. That's what the thing is about. So it's really about Chayei Olam. It's the culmination, it's the destination of our faith. Resurrection from the dead and eternal life. That's when our eternal life begins now for those of us who are already redeemed. But the redemption of our bodies and living in a body for perpetuity, that's what Sukkot is about. And so that's what we need to have in mind if we're here for it this year. If not, we'll be celebrating in a different Sukkah. It's not on the Facebook page, Ginger. It's on MP Fellowship on the Parsha page, mpfellowship.com. Amen. Any other questions? I suppose maybe next week we'll just do Hanukkah and Purim. That's what we'll do next week. Hanukkah and Purim. And then we'll be done with this study. And then we'll have to figure out what we're going to do next. Any other questions before we close down? It's 9 o'clock on the dot. Bueller? Thank you, Ginger. Thanks for being here. All righty. Shalom, shalom, everybody.